Okay, cool.
So, all right.
Good.
All right, thanks.
Okay, great. So let's get started. Hi, everyone. My name is Nimisha. I'm the chief architect here at edX. It's great. This is our first Open edX Architecture Hangout. And looks like we have a good number of people, so that's great. I did want to make sure that we have some time where we get a chance to hear from you guys in terms of what you would like to see in the future going forward with this Hangout. Let's make it our Hangout. But I wanted to set the stage to give you guys some idea of what the architecture team here at edX is looking to do and what our current roadmap looks like. This is something that we did not get a chance to cover really at the Open edX conference earlier this year. So I thought, let me go through that. So let's get started. So what I was thinking, that would be about the first 15 minutes, hoping to leave 5 minutes towards questions. And then Dave Ormsby, who is a lead architect here at edX, he will give an overview of the work that he is doing on Blockstore, which is the underlying framework that we are using for storing content for our courseware. So he's going to talk about that, giving that about 30 minutes or so. And then hopefully we'll have about another 10 or so minutes at the end for questions. So, so let me share my screen. Sorry, hold on. Okay, here we go. Okay, cool. Can you guys see my screen? Yeah, okay. So, oops, that's what I'm gonna do. Okay, can you see when it's in presentation mode? Okay, cool, sounds good. So just a quick context, right, about the growth of our platform. So 2012, when we started, right off the bat in terms of our website, right, 500,000 users. And now fast forward, right, we have 21 million users, and this is just our website. With Open edX, it comes out to what, at least 40 plus million users. We have now 1,500 platforms of Open edX instances, which is also awesome. So anyway, this is great numbers, and in terms of Open edX as a whole, right, the numbers are even substantially greater. So that is awesome achievement from that perspective. But because we have this rapid growth, what has happened is that if you look at our code base, there are definitely things under the covers where we did not add as much intentionality around where we drew lines and adding interfaces and APIs, some of our documentation and so forth. And so what has happened is, that rapid growth then has yielded this, architectural term of ball of mud, right? And could call it our monolith, ball of mud, right? These are terms that some of you guys may have heard of. So that ends up in a system that is very tightly coupled, and it's hard to understand and onboard. And going forward, though, we definitely want to tackle this. And this I did mention at the Open edX conference earlier this year. So just to go through that a little bit again, where we're starting with the ball of mud, but we want to be able to have boundaries that are very clearly delineated, right, in our platform. So the way that we're thinking about this, right, is that within our platform, within our service, we can definitely have logical boundaries, right? And or we could also have physical boundaries. And physical boundaries is where we actually want to head towards with microservices. So if one were to ask us how is the architecture platform, where are we planning, when we're looking forward, where do we want to head? This is it. This is our maturity model. So, yep, JM?
Did you hit record?
Yeah, I did hit record. Okay, thanks. Thanks. And so this is the direction of our edX architecture. And so just to step through that a little bit, right, what we're thinking is we want to be able to have, like, if this red circle that you guys are seeing, right, that is our core platform today. We do want to definitely make that cleaner within the platform. And the way that we can tackle this, because otherwise it seems like a gargantuan, a large effort, is to do it piecemeal and to add interfaces going forward as we work on certain features. And the one way of tackling that and approaching it is to really think that, okay, new features that we add, let's see if we can make it as a plugin, right? As an add-on to our core platform. And so that's what this second box is showing here, where you want to intentionally add the interface. Yes, that interface may not exist currently in our platform, so what can we do to add that? And then new features, can we add it as a plugin or an add-on? Because what has been core is something that has organically developed within it for the last 6 years, but now let's add some intentionality, add a way for people to add to our platform without needing to necessarily modify the platform. And this is something, the open-close principle, right? We mentioned that at the OpenX conference as well, and that is something that you will hear more from me going forward. But I just wanted to set the stage today of our thoughts around that. And then this thing about plugin with signals, it's just allowing us to have even more decoupling between the core of our platform and this add-on. Because with signals, basically what that is just that it allows one to event that something happened and not necessarily make an API call, right? A synchronous call necessarily even, which then leads us, because it's a path towards allowing us to have then more of these decoupled microservices, right? And so microservices is a service-oriented architecture, as you may call it. Like, it's really to have ways for us to have even stricter and enforced boundaries between our components. And with microservices, there's so many advantages to helping us move quicker going forward, because we can independently deploy these components without needing to be tightly coupled in terms of deployment even. So here, what we have drawn here in this fourth box, right, is showing that if we start having these boundaries, right, we can start with second and third boxes perhaps initially, but this is where we want to end up. And sometimes maybe even start here if we can, depending on the feature that you're working on. So if you can have a separate microservice, which is like physically even separated from the core of our platform, and then integrates with other microservices, including the core of our platform, via eventing, via even it could be REST APIs or whatnot, but there is a decoupling there, then it allows us to move faster, because now we could independently modify a microservice, independently go ahead and deploy it, and so forth. This is why, like, you guys may have also heard about our move towards Docker. And Docker is an infrastructure that will allow us going forward, right, to quickly spin up these microservices and deploy them as well. The other thing that you'll notice in this fourth box is this thing called micro front end, right, on the top. And the micro front end is, once again, another boundary that we want to have between our back end and our front end services. And the tactical approach for us there is to use React as the framework for our front end. And in so doing, all of our new front end work, right, will be in React. And we will want it to also be independently deployed from the backend service. So once again, if you want to make a front-end change, you can just go ahead and make that in the micro front-end and not rely on us needing to necessarily update the backend services. So this split between the front-end and the backend services is a big push that we are making, and we feel like that will be a driving force to help us, separate these different components. So that's what this is, the fourth box. And the fifth box is it's sort of an enhancement to this, where we'll start having more of an eventing structure, a pub-sub model to communicate between microservices, something that we haven't yet started investing time in our infrastructure, but that is where we want to head. In the meantime, before having an eventing structure, we would just possibly have API calls that we make between our microservices, or cron jobs that synchronize data and so forth. So definitely we can talk a little bit more about that at some point, and feel free to ask questions in our Slack channel. We have the architecture channel on Slack in the Open edX Slack account. So I'm going to move on and talk a little bit about APIs, right? APIs are the application programming interface. And I wanted to give you guys a perspective on where our head is at on APIs. But before then, let me just do a quick check-in. Are people following me? Okay.
Which channel did you say in Slack?
Did I get logged out? This is weird. Okay. Oh, so this is the architecture channel on Slack. Yeah. Are you guys on RP? Or yeah? Okay. Yeah. That sounds good. Cool. Oh, okay, cool. Sounds good. Okay, so let me continue.
We've got a bunch of chats.
Oh, yeah.
Plus ones I see.
Okay, good, cool.
Good.
Okay, cool. Sounds good. So now APIs. So as we talked about here, there's interfaces we want to create within our platform, right? And this is going to be specifically for plugins and add-ons. And then, because we're going to have these physical boundaries, we want to have interfaces where microservices can communicate with each other, and micro front ends can communicate with the back ends, and so forth. So we need clear contracts between these different components. We need these contracts, these interfaces, these APIs that would be versioned, would be clear when things break, right? There's a lot of best practices and a lot of framework and infrastructure around that we need to develop. So we need to work on that. But let me give here a perspective on what we're thinking about when we're thinking about APIs. And we're right now thinking about these 3 different types of APIs. So first of all, to give you guys a sense of what this diagram is trying to show, right? Here it was once again your micro front end, right, on top. And then you have these microservices in the middle. These microservices are the back-end services running on your, okay, sorry, it says edX.org, so I should change that, sorry about that. But because this is a presentation I'm reusing that we presented internally. But call it your awesome Open edX backend service. So your Open edX backend service here, right, is running these microservices in Docker, and these micro front ends are independently deployed. They are React, front ends deployed possibly even directly from like for us, we use Amazon services. So for us, it would be from Amazon's S3 buckets, right? For you, it might be another a place, could be CDN backed, so that it directly and very quickly is delivered to your end users. So these are our micro front ends. It's running in the user's browsers. These microservices are running on your servers. And if you look a little bit closer, right, hopefully we start having more clear lines in between. And so these components within the microservices and micro front ends are more clearly delineated and more modular and understandable. Now when it comes to APIs, we're thinking about it from these three different types of APIs. There are these APIs right here, right? You see the connection between the micro front end to the microservice. There's an API layer right above each microservice. And that is the API for development work, so that the micro front end can then go ahead and make the calls that it needs to and get the data it needs to from its microservices. And micro front end, for one particular micro front end, it may communicate to multiple microservices. I didn't show that in this diagram, but you know, via AJAX calls, it can go and get its data. And so those APIs are going to be more development-oriented APIs, and those might have less governance, and it may you know, the lifetime of those APIs might be shorter. Maybe, let's say, one Open edX named release, right, is the support level for that. These are things that we'll need to work out and see what works well for our community, as well as for you know, our development community, as well as our partner users of the API. So that's that type of API. Then if you look at all the way on the bottom here, that API layer, right, is the API that is external API to be used when communicating with external services. So let's say your and our university partners, right, the partners that want to maybe go ahead and get access to some of the course content that they provide, or if they want to provision courses and whatnot. These are these external APIs. These would be more long-term APIs. And then there's enterprise partners. This is a new initiative at edX that has started over the last 2 or so years, and that is definitely an up-and-coming area for us, and hopefully for you guys as well. So these enterprise partners would also want to make calls to APIs, for instance, to provision their enterprise users, right? Or get data about how are my employees doing when they're learning on your platform, and so forth. So these are those APIs. And then learning services here is meant to show, for instance, external services like proctoring, like any social learning, maybe adaptive engines, anything to help the learning experience for your learners and our learners. And these external APIs, right, since we're talking to these external services where we don't have as much control, we may want to, first of all, have very curated APIs, very clean namespace, therefore more governance around it, you know, more review and so forth. The lifetime of those APIs might also be longer. Maybe they're 2 years or something rather than one Open edX named release. Once again, things that we will need to work out, but this is what we're thinking our vision is. And lastly, the third set of APIs are these. If you look at these black things, they're meant to be plugins, right? So they're plugging into a component. Here in this case, these are plugins plugging into the microservice without needing to modify the microservice, but you want to add to it. You want to enhance all of the things that we have in our core platform, but you want to add to it without needing to go ahead and always merge upstream. We want to provide a way for people to create these plugins so that allows you to go ahead and modify things at your leisure, but still make them available for others to use. Those others could be other Open edX instances, could also be our edX.org website. These plugins, the way that we're envisioning it is that you have these plugins on the back end. You also have plugins on the front end, right? Can we enhance our front ends without needing to deploy and update our back ends? You know, can we create JavaScript libraries that then get deployed and perhaps, you know, just from the user perspective, the end user can add those libraries, or course teams can add libraries, right? Without necessarily needing to ask the operator of an Open edX installation to go ahead and update their servers. So plugins on the front end and plugins on the back end. And there too, there will need to be contracts. We'll need to make sure that these contracts are clear so that the plugin developers are able to add to these components for a period of time, knowing what the life cycle is and so forth. So anyway, there's a lot that I just said. There's a lot to digest. We'll see what the questions come up. So how is the edX architecture team approaching this? It seems like I've said a lot here. Yes, this seems all fine and dandy. How are we going to go about this? So we do have a plan in place. It's going to take a village to go ahead and support all this. We need support from the community as well as internally. We all, the more that we all drive towards the same goal, the faster we're going to get there, and the more unified and more, the more gains we'll get in a quicker manner. So this is how we're thinking about it, right? There's a lot to take in here in this diagram as well, so don't worry about it. Actually, just follow these three elliptical things here, where approachability of our platform, extensibility of our platform, and then time to market. Those are the three main top level goals. Okay, the things that are in the middle are what we talked about at the Open edX conference. So if you look at the video on future directions of Open edX architecture or whatever at the Open edX conference earlier this year, you'll hear us talking about domain-driven design and solid and reactive manifesto and evolutionary architecture and whatnot. And these are all things that we want to keep in mind going forward, because what we will talk about and how we approach things are all based on that inner diamond, this inner treasure trove of architectural principles. But in terms of how we're actually going to do it and what's our tactical thing, it's really these three things of how do we make our platform more approachable? And here, who feels the pain? The Open edX community feels a lot of pain of this, as well as internally, but I would love for the community to help us with this, because you as the consumers of it, and you will be able to tell us more of what's really needed here. If you can help drive that, I would love for that to happen. Extensibility is something where there's been some conversations already. Open edX proposals coming in from the community around theming, which has been great. There's some initial effort on plugins and thinking about that. But this is how we want to, once again, make sure that we can extend our platform so that in the end, both approachability and extensibility is going to result in us being able to evolve our platform in a timely manner. And so that's that top thing here around time to market, which is our ultimate goal, because we want to create a platform that is going to innovate, right, around learning. And how can we do that? Well, the best way of doing that is to be able to innovate and experiment quickly and try new things and put it out there for the Open edX community. And so that's what that goal there is. Now, what is the edX architecture team really going to be focusing on initially? Our team is right now a small team, but we are going to be focusing on more of that split front ends that I talked about, which is, the micro front ends splitting from our micro back ends, our microservices. And that, we believe, is going to be a driving force, right, to force us to think more about those APIs that are needed. And we do feel that in terms of deployability, that will allow us to go ahead and, quickly deploy front ends without needing to update our back ends. So
Peter has a question.
Oh yeah, here's a question.
In the diagram, there are multiple plugin points, all labeled API. Can you qualify them? APIs at the bottom are REST APIs? Are the microservice APIs Python APIs? Django-specific APIs like Signals, or something else?
Okay, awesome question. Thank you, Peter. Yes, so the bottom API here, right, at this moment in time, yes, we are thinking that they are REST APIs. And then even these APIs between micro frontend and microservices, those will also be REST APIs. At a moment in time, and there has been mentions of GraphQL coming into play. At this moment in time, there's a lot to tackle with our platform. that we haven't actually really GraphQL is still also a bit premature in its development in the field. There's a lot, if we blindly go after that, one of the concerns is that then we will have a monolith API, which is a natural thing to happen with GraphQL unless if you're very intentional about it. But anyway, I just wanted to throw out there that you might see GraphQL in our platform at some point, but it's not something that we're going to tackle right now at this moment. But this API here, if you guys heard of API Gateway, right, where there is a centralized place where one can go ahead and enter into your service, into your servers. This potentially could be a curated list of APIs, more governed, very careful around, rate limiting and things like that, and that could potentially be in an API gateway, is what we're thinking. But both of these, yes, would be REST APIs. Now, in terms of plugin APIs, yes, great question. Let's figure that out. There are possibilities of various things there, and what are we doing on time? Okay, so yes, Django Signals is also considered a plugin API here on the back end. Django app plugins, that some of you may have known about. If you haven't heard of it, don't worry, we'll talk about it later. But essentially allowing people to have a way of plugging and adding, basically listening to signals and stuff that are happening in the back end without needing to actually update this back end microservice, right? Those are all, in my mind, plugin interfaces. And there's other things as well. There's Xblocks is also a plugin interface, right? So these are all ways of creating your own independent component that can then be plugged into the backend. And even for Xblocks, we want to enhance it further so that you don't necessarily need to perhaps update things that are in the core of our platform to make use of your Xblocks. So anyway, so that's that. In the front end, we'll need to figure out there as well. There might be some JavaScript interfaces that you'll need. How do you go ahead and plug in a React component into our React framework? These are all awesome challenges that we're looking forward to tackling, and we'll work through this year. So, okay, cool. So just moving now quickly ahead, so split front ends, like I said, are the main focus right now for the architecture team. However, we're going to do some progress on these other areas as well, approachability and extensibility. The things here that are on the bottom, I'll get to, there's another slide, but it's all about these are efforts that are coming in from the community and we'll make use of extensibility, but I'll mention that in a minute. In terms of approachability, minimizing code complexity and developer docs. Where do we store our developer docs? How are they maintained? And all those things. There is an OpenX proposal that is in progress for that. So that will be good to push forward. So this is more of a detailed roadmap where I delineated more, just basically fleshing out some more of the thoughts that we have around these. And I love to talk about this more, perhaps in a future architecture hangout, depending on your interests. We can see where you guys want to dive deeper into some of our vision, as well as who wants to help with what, and so forth. So I won't go into the details here, but I did want to talk a little bit about just this, right? This is the split front ends part. So this part. This is what the architecture team's been working on. The things that you see here that are highlighted, so the more that it's highlighted means the more that it's completed. Some things, as you'll see, have already been completed. Independently deploying micro front ends. So we did some GoCD work on our side, open sourcing that so that it could be available for others. Being able to do JOTs as asymmetric keys, monitoring and logging our authentication. All of these things are in the end a package to allow us to do micro front ends. And I think like in a future Hangout, we can talk a little bit more and dive deeper into what we're talking about. We're talking about authentication and how is that going to enable micro front ends, and what is our vision for authentication on the platform. As some of you may know, we have so many different multiple implementations of authentication, multiple ways of doing it, whether it's microservices communicating with each other, or mobile apps communicating to our platform, or web browser and so forth. So we're trying to consolidate that, and it's going to help us hopefully move faster going forward. So that's what that effort is. We're going to then work on a universal header and footer that can be used throughout the platform. And then we're going to look at login and registration and possibly the learner dashboard. So these are our current thoughts about what we will do in terms of rewriting efforts, as well as some of these runways, some of these infrastructural support that we need to support this going forward. So that's pretty much it. Just a final quick thing, and we can talk about this more too, is just what we've talked about so far is about our current platform, right, and laying the foundation and updating it so we can move faster. Then there's some other work that the architecture team is also doing in terms of supporting our future. And so Dave's going to talk a little bit about the block store. So I won't take up more time on that aspect, but just to give a fuller picture, adaptive learning is something that we've we've invested some time in. We had a workshop earlier this year. We've laid down the foundation of different components that we will need. And thanks to efforts from the community, we're moving forward on a lot of these things. OpenCraft is building content tagging. Fun is doing real-time eventing and so forth. Berkeley, Zach Pardos is actually working on some front-end plugins for adaptive learning. So it's actually exciting to see the community come together and actually help us towards the future and where we can head. So that's pretty much it. And this is just a quick glimpse of the team here that's on the architecture side. Marco and Greg are our product representatives. Darren's been helping us with some of the user experience. And then the rest of us are Doug, Dave, Robert, myself, and Ed are on the engineering side. So, okay, cool. So that's all I had.
Do you know his permission before putting a picture on?
What? I need a permission?
No.
No. Okay, cool. So, Dave, sorry, were you saying something?
That's fine.
Okay, so yeah, Dave's just pointing out that I've taken up a lot of time, and so he might be able to squeeze it in 20 minutes. But so what? How come I don't see the chats? What are people saying?
Oh.
So what shall we? Yeah, I know I did. I know. Okay, I think I have two things going on.
Yeah, you're logging in twice for some reason.
Yeah, I think that's what happened.
edX.
Yeah,
but I didn't want to
yeah.
mess with it because you were like recording and I didn't want to break something.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about, so what we could do is we can just take questions and use this time to actually just, because there's a lot that was covered, and let's not push it with Blockstore. Dave, is that okay? And let's actually have another time for Blockster, right? Rather than just pushing a lot of content. I'd love to hear more from the community.
Sure. Works for me.
Yeah? Okay. What do you guys think? So we could take actually the rest of the time for questions.
And brainstorming about what else to do with these future things.
Exactly. And future topics we'd like to
do we want to
discuss.
do these every month, 2 months, every quarter?
Yeah. So right at this moment, we're thinking we would do these once a month, and so every 4 weeks. What does the community think? Was this useful, first of all, to see all this? Are people there?
Sure. I just want to say it's definitely useful. It's great to see the future of this like months before it happens, so we can prepare and we can actually help along the way. I wanted to say I'm loving the work you did on plugins, and we are using them extensively. So I super welcome everything that has to do with extensibility of the platform, because that's what we do like 90% of our time.
Okay.
Which takes me to, for the work that you mentioned of the university, enterprise, and other learning services APIs,
Yes.
I would also like those to be made pluggable. So as a developer, I can create interfaces as complex as what you at edX.org are creating, because I can access the same sort of underlying services or underlying pieces of code in the same way that you're doing. I can actually look at your example and say, oh, this is how they access this very internal part of the course content or the enrollment process, whatnot. And then I can use that as an example with my own interfaces, but I can also tune the ones that you created for the edX.org case off if I want to. So I can say from the pluggable interfaces or from the pluggable enterprise APIs, I don't want to have this and that, and I want to recreate some as my own. So that work, if that is made in the same way that the plugins are done, that would be super awesome.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. So if I can echo what you are saying, let me see if I got this. You're suggesting that even, for example, these APIs that we are planning to develop here, if we can make the APIs themselves pluggable so that you can add your own APIs, maybe, and also if you can extend our API implementation. Is that right, Felipe?
Yeah, and maybe sometimes actually what I'm looking forward is to take out some of the APIs that you're creating, because perhaps for the use case of edX.org, there is a big enterprise customer that requires a lot of stuff that I or one of my customers, which is a university, might not want, so I want to completely trim that off if it's selectable or if it's configurable in any form.
Yes. Okay. So that's a good idea. You know what? Would you be interested in being a PR reviewer for one of the API? So we're starting to actually work on an API for proctoring services, right? To integrate with proctoring services. Is that a good example of something that, I mean, is that at all of interest, for instance, for anyone in the community to help with reviewing that design? So I guess what I'll do is I will ask the team that's actually working on it to see if they can create an OpenEdX proposal around what they are developing. So I do hope that people here are aware of our OpenEdX proposals, I guess, framework, right? Where we do have a GitHub repository where we keep these design documents around how we're going to go about doing something. So it could be either be an architectural design practice, or it could be a best practice, essentially, or it could be a process proposal. And so what I'll do is I'll ask our internal team here to make sure that they do write that up, and then Felipe and others in the community, maybe that would be a good way of giving us some feedback on how can we do it so that it's configurable and extendable and pluggable. Those are the three things that I'm hearing that we should try to see if we could do that in our APIs.
That's awesome. Thanks.
Okay, cool. Yeah, sorry.
There's a question from Alexis about how can a non-developer contribute to this project. If you want to hear more about that, we have our monthly community hangout coming up in about 2 weeks, or actually a week and a half, and we'll talk about architecture is definitely has a place. An architecture update will definitely be part of that hangout, but it's also focused on other things like documentation, events, the OpenEdX 2019 conference. So feel free to reach out to me. More than happy to give you an overview of how other ways you can contribute. And in fact, just very briefly, I I've been envisioning kind of the Open edX community as a three-legged stool, where the three legs are technologists, educators, and learners. And so over the years, we've done a pretty good job of keeping technologists in the loop somewhat, but I'm really going to be focusing on building out the other two legs of that stool, the educators and the learners. How can we bring them in, make them more of a, a primary part of the community as opposed to an afterthought or something that we just listen to once a year at the conference, how we incorporate them into more of the day-to-day activities. So would love to follow up with you and hear your ideas there. Thanks.
So there was a lot that was covered today. Either now or independently, even on Slack, feel free to reach out to me or to the Pound Architecture Slack room and let us know if you have any other feedback or questions essentially on what has been covered. At this time, does anybody want to dive deep or have questions on any of the material we covered so far?
Is there a timeline associated with this roadmap? Sorry.
So yeah, in terms of a timeline, let me bring this. So at this point, at this point in time, this is our initial focus for specifically that architecture team where, it's right now 3 developers, including myself. So this is what we're planning to tackle. We are hoping that there will be more people in the community as well as internally that will also help us, with the larger vision that we have on how to tackle this. So, but in the meantime, with a small team of 3, this is what we're currently thinking. Right, and so doing right with the micro front ends and split front ends, it will help us start thinking about what our best practices are for APIs and how we're going to tackle APIs, and also start addressing some of the React best practices and the front end best practices. How do we make our front ends configurable? How do we plug into our front ends? How do we do the theming? Basically have now, even though the Open edX proposal is written around theming, actually put that into practice and see what is going to be viable and flesh out that design. So that's what we're currently going to focus on. In terms of the future Hangouts, we have right now this, we're considering talking about Block Store, which, sorry that we didn't get to that today. So that is one topic that was requested. The other one was around perhaps diving deeper into authentication. Are those the types of topics that people would find useful? And feel free to either add a chat message as a way of communicating back or start speaking.
Authentication would be great.
Yeah, so Peter's saying authentication would be great. Sounds good.
And maybe we can set up I guess you already did set up a page to take in feedback. Okay.
Yeah, so I posted a link earlier, on the chat with a link to the Arc Hangouts wiki. So feel free to add your topics there. Any other types of thoughts or ideas of how best to interact with the architecture team or make use of this? Okay, so
I didn't want to hog all the speaking time, but I'm very interested in the evolution of the platform towards giving other users like us or more in the community the ability to change what is not in the course. What from my conversation with customers and the work that I get hired to do with the platform, I feel like once I'm in the course, the platform is just outstanding. But outside of the course, it has a lot of the business logic of edX.org tied in.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I will always be trying to push towards having like the ability to change the registration process or the fields that get asked or the access restriction, the rules of enrollment, the certificates, free or not free, all those kinds of things that perhaps as a business decision, I understand why edX did it or didn't, but some of other customers of mine might have a different opinion, and I cannot say like, okay, you know what, edX did it this way, this is the way it's supposed to be.
Right.
They just want it their way. So I end up working and driving against the current. That's sort of my expectation for this.
It is not our intention at all for our business model to be reflected or necessarily, at all be used by other open edX platforms, and quite the contrary, actually, right? I mean, our scale and our partners are going to be very different, and you as the open edX community actually are you're out there and interacting with partners and learners very different from the ones that we interact with. And from that perspective, you're actually helping and enabling our mission in a way that we are not able to. So it is definitely not our intention for our business model at all to be, used by you. JM, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, was that Felipe?
That was Felipe, and yes.
Yep.
One thing a favor I'd like to ask of you is, you mentioned you did a fork because you had to take out the edX business logic. Is there some way we could like get or see some kind of overview of what you had to fork and change in order to create kind of a viable product? Because one of the things we're interested in doing is kind of taking input from those of you who are, needing to fork and add customization and kind of develop a means of, as input, using what you've already done so we can incorporate that into future releases so we can go towards the process of creating, something that isn't so tied to edX.org. It's something that is more, more feasible for community members to use, quote unquote, out of the box before you have to take this great effort to get it ready. So anything we can do to kind of build on what you've done and what other companies have done, like AppSummer, Microsoft, et cetera, so that we can create a better named release process, will be most welcome. So thank you.
Sure. Naturally, our fork is out there in the GitHub page for our edX. So you could actually go and see it, but you know what the forks look like. So it just looks exactly like any other fork. But if you want, I can make a list and just reach out to you and show you like the kinds of things that we're doing. And probably you can tell me what of that seems interesting for someone else. And I can dig a little bit deeper into that. Because some things are very customer specific and some we do see it repeating over and over. So I'd be happy to share all that.
Yeah, and I think Ned is actually taking a look at your GitHub repo. But it would probably help after we go over it to kind of talk to you about what you did and how you did it. Yeah.
Sure.
Thanks.
And I think that we are going to follow up right on the free certificates. The courses the change that we made that was not really intentional, right? So I do hope. And if the OpenX community actually has a pull request to make that configurable, right, rather than it be tied to our business logic, then please feel free to propose something there. That would be great to help us also move that change along.
There's a question.
Yep.
If you can see it from Usman.
Yep. So given the move towards plugins, are there documentation around changes in policies around the type of contributions that can be made to the current open edX repositories? Yeah, no, thank you, Usman, for asking that question. In terms of changes to policies and whatnot, so as is our practice, right? We would, I do plan to have a open edX proposal around plugins as well. And in terms of, policy changes and whatnot, there are, yes, we're trying to figure out what's the best way to enforce and support and, move us in a place where our core platform actually becomes a platform, right? Rather than just a hodgepodge of different features. And so, what is the best path forward for that? These will be changes, yes, that we would have to make both internally in edX, as well as with the support of the Open edX community to start moving towards that effort. So some of you may have heard John Mark talk also at the Open edX conference earlier this year about this move towards having a core edX, and then beyond that, a bubble of, an Open edX, which would have Open edX plugins. And then beyond that, another extension, right? What term did you use? But that's more of just allowing people to add their own plugins and extensions.
Oh yeah, that's kind of the friends of Open edX.
You're right, the friends of Open edX, you may say. So that three-tiered perspective where, there's core, and what core really should be things that would be more applicable to, most of all Open edX platforms. And then this adding a layer of add-ons where it's more features that you add to the core. And then finally, the friends of Open edX, which is not necessarily something that applies to all Open edX platforms, but we also want to allow people to go ahead and experiment and develop and whatnot without needing to necessarily worry about the Open edX scalability needs, for instance. So
yeah, we want to make it as easy as possible for people to contribute and collaborate.
Yeah. So Usman, please look forward to that. I there will be some further communication around that in terms of how we want to move forward with trying to really make our platform more of a platform with trying to enforce and use the open close principle. So. Okay. So Giovanni is asking, do you recommend upgrade Open edX to the latest version?
Yes.
And where can we get the latest docs about the new architecture and how to upgrade?
So the docs are all at docs.edx.org. The upgrade process is to install the software onto a new machine and then move your data over.
Right. So by upgrading to the latest release, right, you are able to take advantage of the new features that have come in. And I believe it was AppSembler that had a great blog post, right, where they feature, where they talk about some of the, about the new features in Hawthorne. So you can take a look at that, and hopefully some of them are appealing for your learner base and your partner base. And that is an incentive to upgrade to Hawthorne. There have been, security upgrades as well as, other things around privacy, and there's been a lot of things. And I think the blog post from Nate at AppSembler highlights a lot of those great things. And then the other thing is that by trying to remain up to date with our Open edX releases, right? You are able to then in the future also update, right? Rather than trying to get too far behind. So I think it's in that way, it's good to remain up to date. And also in terms of if we do have security patches, we only patch it in our latest master plus just one Open edX release behind. We don't go further behind that. So from the security perspective as well, it's great to remain up to date.
Just a general note, if you're interested in kind of new latest features and the latest release, you should come to the community hangout. It's also every month. It's really more tailored to kind of a general overview of things going on in the community, including latest releases. And we can certainly have demos of specific features that you're interested in. The architecture hangout is really geared towards kind of forward-looking, architectural changes and development. And it's really focused on developers. The community hangout is really more of a general users, developers, and other interested parties. So.
Yeah, we should probably have one centralized place where we list these hangouts. There's also operational, right, team hangouts as well.
Right.
So okay, you're gonna post a link or go on. Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you all very much. If you have, like I said, any other feedback or questions for us, then feel free to reach out directly to me or the architecture Slack channel on Slack. So, yeah, I think that's the one, right? Yeah. Okay, cool. Thank you all very much. And Dave, sorry we didn't get a chance to talk about Blockster this time, but we'll schedule that for a next time. And that will allow you guys to have more time, actually, and hopefully a chance to ask questions about that in more deep as well.
Sounds great.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day, good night, good evening, good afternoon for a global world. Thanks, everyone.